Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this Blitz chess postmortem. This is a postmortem of my Blitz game number 302. I was white and I started with d4. My opponent played g6, a very unusual response. The ECO, the Encyclopedia of Chess Openings, the ECO codes rather, refer to this as the modern defense. I was thinking it was more like a Benoni after these first few moves. I play e4. And my opponent played c5. He could have just played bishop g7 and would have transposed into a king's Indian. But d5, this is, c5 here is the characteristic move of the Benoni, the fianchetto of the bishop, and playing c5, encouraging the d pawn to come forward. The chess engine is saying I could just take that pawn, which I really didn't think about too much during the game or at all. You typically don't want to grab a pawn like that in the opening unless you're familiar with the opening. So d5 is a reasonable way to play. Also knight f3, just defending. And my opponent plays bishop g7, logical, and I develop my knight. And now he plays queen here, check. So we're out of the opening book after that. So let's back to the notation tab. After he had played this, I was wondering if I could have gotten away with c5 on the previous move. So instead of knight f3, that's another idea, is to just build this big pawn center here. This is looking more like a modern Benoni, and black could transpose into the modern Benoni by playing d6 and e6. And if the check comes here, there's some interesting tricks. I was a little worried about playing bishop d2 in this case, why I avoided this line, because this pawn is hanging. But the queen has to move first, and say the queen goes here to try and put more pressure on b6. It's interesting that you can play knight c3 here and just ignore the threat to b2 rather. The queen goes to b6 to put more pressure on b2. You can just ignore the threat to b2 because the queen can't actually take that pawn. It gets trapped in kind of an amusing way. So the queen takes. Rook there chasing the queen. And b takes, bishop takes c3 is just a way of giving up the queen. If the queen tries to save itself, going to this square, for example, then knight b5, that's the killer move. Hits the queen and threatens knight to c7 check. And so the queen, I guess maybe it was wrong to call it a queen trap. The queen still has squares it can go to. Well, say it takes the pawn. That's probably the best move, and then check. So the main point, though, is that this square is guarded by the bishop, so the queen can't. The queen cannot come back. What are all these lines doing here? Oh. I've confused myself with all these lines. The queen can't come back to this square and guard c7 because the bishop is controlling it. So that's why this knight b5 move is so strong. So if we back up here, it's just not safe for the queen to take that pawn. So this is, anyway, this would have been a valid line. But that's not what we played. I played knight f3 first, deferring this c5 move, and I really wasn't sure whether I wanted to play c4 or c3. My opponent played queen a5 check, and now I went in with c3 to block the check. And you can see the engine likes this position for white. It's probably a pretty decent position. So we go on a few moves with some normal development. And the other reason I was avoiding c4 was because this b5 move to set up a Binko gambit is always in the air, and I wasn't wanting to play a Binko gambit just then. Although it's certainly a playable opening for both sides, as usual. Okay, so development, bishop e2, knight f6. Not that knight, the other knight. Castles, castles. So all this looks pretty normal and maintains this edge for white. And now I start to think about this move b4, which he could have played at various times. The idea is to weaken the c3 pawn. His knight is in the way, but once this knight moves out of the way, his bishop on this diagonal could be pretty strong. So that's why I play a3 to slow that down. Maybe not the most accurate move. When you play these defensive moves, say queen c2 would have been a little more active. Okay, I go a3. He goes c4. A little bit surprising. I was expecting b4 rather than c4. So he sets up his pawns like this, in kind of a static structure. He's never getting he's never getting b4 in now, and his bishop is never getting active because these pawns are now quite strong. And also there's a square for my knight here on d4. So all in all, this was a good move for me. Bad move for black. So knight d4. See that square, and I take it immediately. Queen drops back to b6. And queen c2, defending my e-pawn. I want to be able to be free to move my knight. And he goes e5. And now I figure I should take. Yeah, the engine approves of this. I've got a good square for my knight. I don't want to give it up. So I take there, and he took back with the pawn, which I was expecting. The engine thinks, okay, no, they're both good. Never mind. So now I should play a4. And I thought about a4, and I didn't like it. I still was a little bit afraid of this b4 idea. But a4 is a very logical move, just going after the queenside pawns here, which are weak, and I've already got pressure on b5, so more just a way of increasing the pressure. Instead, I played b3, and it's just not as good. He can weaken my pawns over here now with an exchange, but he throws in the move e5 first, which is good. I drop back, and then yeah, okay, I was going to say the engine was recommending knight takes b5. That's kind of strange. Knight takes b5. Is that really possible? And why can't the queen take that? Oh, that's a neat trick. That is a neat trick. The bishop can take this pawn. It's defended by this pawn, and it's a fork. It's a fork between the queen and the king. Okay, so I could have grabbed the b5 pawn. Pretty interesting. Okay, I retreated the knight. Didn't see that. And he plays bishop e6. And now I exchange here, and this wins a pawn for me. Although rook b1 is the more accurate move right here, or knight g5, hitting the bishop. So the way I played this, just grabbing the pawn, is not the best way. But I took bishop takes, came back with check. And, well, this is still pretty good. I guess he should have just moved his queen here and not gotten this, let me get this exchange in, because now I have the bishop pair, and I've got an attack on his king. Well, it's not quite an attack, but it maybe forces his king back to an awkward square. Okay, I develop with bishop e3, hitting his queen, queen c7, bishop a2. So I should be in the driver's seat now, but you'll see shortly I managed to screw up. So he comes to g4, hitting my bishop. And I just drop back, wanting to keep the bishop pair. He develops his knight to a6, and now I chase his knight away. I figured it wasn't doing much there, but you don't want to leave the knight hanging around where it might cause trouble later. Rook a to b1, get my rooks on open files. He goes to c5. And here's the point. After knight c5, of course, he's immediately threatening to take my e-pawn, which is important to my whole structure here. So I should play knight g5 to defend that. And something like knight g5, if he tries to chase my knight away, I can drop into e6, hitting his queen and his rook. And so that's good for me. So knight g5 turns out to be a fine way to defend that pawn. Instead, I didn't even notice that that was under attack, or I just moved too quickly, really. I played bishop e3. Getting the bishop off of this d2 square wasn't doing a whole lot. I wanted to get a rook on the d file and go after this backwards d pawn, but that just loses loses a pawn here. And so now I had quite an advantage before, but now it's closer to equal. But it's interesting, even a pawn down, I still have more than enough compensation in the form of the bishop pair, and he's got weak pawns. He's got weak pawns here and here, so still an okay position for white. c4, not the most accurate move. What's it say? Rook b4? Okay, activating the rook. Or rook f to c1. Okay. Or knight to g5 again. I come up with this knight g5 idea later, so let's just play on a few moves. There's knight g5. And I just thought it would activate my bishop and get rid of his pair of knights, so he's just got one knight for me to worry about. So there's an exchange of rooks here. And he plays queen c6. Okay, so he's trying to maybe maneuver his queen to a better square, but he left his a-pawn hanging. So I drop back here, and I am threatening to take that, although he goes knight e4. I guess that was the purpose of the queen move, was support a knight on e4, which is a good square. I could take the pawn now, but I decided to play a few other moves first. I thought the d-pawn really was more important than the a-pawn. He went knight c5, hitting the queen. So there's a bit of a dance here. Cancel that. I went queen e2. Didn't want to go back to the same square where he could repeat moves. He goes knight a4. Now I go queen d2. So I get to where I want to be. And now if he comes back here, I have time to take some two moves to harass my queen again, and I can bring my rook over and put pressure on the d-pawn immediately. But he didn't do that. He pushed his e-pawn forward. So I followed with my idea of rook d1, putting pressure here. He defends. And now I decide to grab the a-pawn, which has been sitting there. And he brings his knight into c3, defended by his bishop, hitting my bishop. I thought this was still okay. I was willing to give up the bishop pair here. I've got a pawn up, and I'll get rid of this annoying knight, which is his most active piece. Although he's got a good bishop. But it's not hitting. It's interesting that it's often a strategy when your opponent has this fianchettoed bishop. It's hitting the long diagonal, so you just take everything off the long diagonal, so it doesn't have really any targets. So it's a fine-looking piece covering a lot of squares, but it's not actually doing a whole lot at the moment. Okay, he plays rook a1, hitting my bishop and putting pressure on the a-pawn. I drop back, also defending my rook. I was a little bit worried that he could play in this position the move d5. Yeah, it is a move here. See, d5 is a problem because I can't take it. The rook is loose here. So bishop to e3. He could push on with d4. Bishop to g5. Yeah, this would have been better for white. I mean, for black. He's got these strong pawns, and I don't like this position. The engine still thinks I can defend it, but I don't like this position. I mean, I do have an extra pawn, but this, and one thing in my favor is this pawn is held up by my f pawn, so only the d pawn can come forward, and it'll be stopped on d3. It looks like. So I guess this is a survivable position, but I was glad he didn't find that move and played rook a8 instead. So I retreat my bishop. He goes rook b8. And I get my queen over here. He chases me around a little bit, and I'm just trying to keep my pawns and push the a-pawn, which will be an important trump card in the endgame. And queen, after queen c7, it looks like I could have played c5 immediately. Yeah, once again, he could take it. That would just be a trade. But the rook on c5 maybe is that's the idea. Yeah, if he takes, let's go ahead and show this. I can take, and if the queen goes out of the way, it says queen takes c5, but how about queen to b7, say? Yeah, then I can come to the back rank and checkmate him. That's the problem. So, and if he goes over here, say, to guard against the checkmate, and the rook can come here, and then yeah, bishop here. This can also lead to checkmate. So okay, so I need to just open up lines for my rook here, and I'm in good shape. So that's why c5 right here is a good move. Played queen d5 instead. I was still thinking of rounding up pawns rather than checkmating my opponent's king, but this situation here can be kind of awkward because the bishop's only move to defend against the back rank threats is to come to f8 there, where it can often be taken. So anyway, the game continues with an exchange here, and I grab another pawn, so I am winning here, and I force the exchange of bishops, and I figured this should be fairly easy to win with my extra pawn. Although the game goes on, it's always a bit tricky when your opponent has a queen, but now I didn't see any way for him to stop my pawn from becoming a queen, and it does eventually. And let's see, there's a couple mates I miss here. Right here, Queen f8 is a maiden one. So what did I play? Oh, I took his queen. I mean, that's obviously winning, but the maiden one is quicker. But we were getting a little low on time. Anyway, I chased his king into a mating net here, and finally checkmate him there. So that's how the game ended. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and leave me any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.